Modern Formula One cars are a shadow of the vehicles that legends like Ayrton Senna and Michael Schumacher drove. The current crop of cars are massive, pretty much the same size as a Ford F-150 truck, and weigh almost a ton. They are boats compared to the nimble and exciting cars that made F1 famous. Fortunately, that's all going to be changing soon. Today, I'll cover the huge news from the FIA, detailing the design of the 2026 cars, and how they're taking the sport back to its roots. Formula One has ballooned in popularity in the last 10 years, reaching more people than ever before. That doesn't mean the sport is the best it's ever been though. There is a lot to like about F1 as a fan at the moment. There are plenty of races, the coverage is pretty good, and the sport was really competitive in 2023, as long as you forgot that Max Verstappen existed. But if you ask an older fan, they'll tell you about the pre-millennium F1 cars that were absolutely incredible. Obviously, the sound of the old V10 or V12 engines that could rev up to 20,000 RPM were incredible, but that isn't the only thing that has changed. As F1 cars have filled with technology and safety features over the past 20 years, they've grown in size and put on the pounds. The current cars weigh almost double what they did 30 years ago. Those old cars were small and agile, creating exciting racing where overtaking could be done almost anywhere. They were closer to go-karts than the current breed of F1 cars. Since the turn of the millennium, the growth of F1 cars has taken away some raciness in the sport. Making a darting move down the inside is much harder in something the size of an F-150 pickup truck, or for our UK viewers, a car that's about 20% bigger than a Ford Galaxy. If you ever went to a kid's birthday party or a youth football game with 7 mates in the seats and 3 more in the boot, you know how ridiculously large those cars are. Modern F1 cars are behemoths, at 5.6 meters long and 2 meters wide. Weighing basically 800 kilograms before the driver gets in as well, they're just not made for mid-turn overtaking moves. If you think about the vast majority of F1 overtaking moves, most of the time it is after a DRS-aided drag race down a long straight. Very rarely do we see someone really pull off a move around the outside of a corner or up the inside of one. The lack of raciness has been a growing pain point for fans for a long time, and the FIA are finally starting to accept that something needs to be done about it. The size of the cars is a massive part of this problem. If they were lighter and smaller, then darting around the track or going 2 abreast through a corner would be much easier. But the aero rules are also partly to blame. There has been talk about changing the current technical regulations to help improve racing further, and the introduction of the ground effect cars in 2022 did help with that a bit. But there is still work to be done, and many people have been asking for that to happen sooner rather than later. Much of the motivation of the new rules was to inspire closer wheel-to-wheel racing with regular passing maneuvers, but FIA technical boss Nicholas Tombazis admits that the cars didn't quite live up to the hype in 2023. Overtaking has become more difficult because the cars are putting out more dirty air to the rear. He says the teams have begun to find ways around the intention of the aerodynamic regulations. We didn't close some loopholes quickly enough, especially in the area of the front wing end plate and the front brake scoops, said Tombazis. But the turbulence is still significantly less bad than was the case with the 2021 cars. The bad news is that Tombazis says the FIA will not try to close those loopholes now, with only 2 more seasons to run until all new rules debut in 2026. Closing the loopholes would mean going through the entire decision-making process again. It's too late for that. We can only do better for 2026, he insisted. The same applies to the floor of the cars, after some suggested a good solution to make the racing better would be to make them a standard part. We didn't get enough support from the teams for that, he says, but it will be simplified for 2026. Before getting into the details of the 2026 cars, I want to let you know that over the Christmas holidays, we'll be releasing a 3-hour video on the complete history of Formula One. We'll highlight some of the best seasons, the craziest technical developments, and the stories of the most famous racing drivers of each decade. We're super excited to share it with you all, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it when it drops. What will be changing for 2026 has long been an area of speculation, as the new rules were devised in the mysterious halls of the FIA. But with the new era of F1 just around the corner, in F1 timeframes anyway, the governing body have finally released details of what will be changing. Central to the changes are new power unit regulations, but they were announced years ago now. It's not only the engines that are going to be new though, there are going to be major revisions to the cars too, to help improve the on-track racing, and make the sport less about the ability to drag race and more about outmaneuvering your opposing driver. One of the biggest complaints about the current cars is that they're so heavy. This not only makes them less responsive, but it's also punishing on tyres, which are critical to the spectacle. At the moment, F1 drivers had to hold off on delivering the maximum possible performance of their car, because the tyres physically cannot handle it. They start to disintegrate even after one lap of pushing. At a recent press conference, the governing body's head of single-seaters, Nicholas Tombazis, explained that the basic layout of an F1 2026 car is defined and will be different to what we have at the moment. The cars will be shorter, with the wheelbase likely trimmed down to 3,400mm from the current maximum 3,600mm. The cars will also be narrower by 10cm, so reduced from 2,000mm to 1,900mm. 20cm off the length and 10cm off the width might not sound like much, but it will have a huge impact on the weight of the cars. We aim to have a significantly lower weight limit, and we're looking to reduce the weight limit by 40 to 50 kilos in 2026, said Tombazis. The way we want to do that is related to what we've termed the nimble car concept, because we basically feel that in recent years the cars have become a bit too bulky and too heavy. Like I said, the FIA have been listening. The smaller dimensions will automatically help with the weight because there's obviously just less car. But they will help in another, less obvious way: a reduction of downforce. Less weight means less downforce produced. The simplest possible explanation of this is that force equals mass multiplied by acceleration. Reduce the mass and you reduce the force. Less force being applied to parts means that you can reduce the strength and therefore weight of certain parts, again reducing the overall weight of the cars. This lower downforce means that a lot of the loading on components, such as suspension, will reduce, and that will enable the teams to reduce the weight consequently, said Tombazis. More savings will also come from F1 ditching the current 18-inch wheels. Tombazis added, "We are tentatively aiming for wheels that are 16-inch wheel rims, with smaller wheel diameter and smaller width both front and rear. All of these things, we believe, are pushing toward a significantly lower weight. Again, smaller size means less weight. While the change in size and weight of the cars will help the racing, the problem with the current regulations goes further than just the dimensions of the cars. Aerodynamics and the effect of a leading car on the downforce produced by a following car has a massive impact on the raceability of F1 cars. An F1 car works best when it's driving in perfectly still air. That's just the way they're designed. The air that comes out of the back of the car is all messy. It's been pushed about as the car travels through it, creating vortexes and areas of different pressures and non-uniform flow patterns. This is commonly referred to as dirty air. When an F1 car drives through that, they create less downforce because the aerodynamic components of the car don't work as efficiently as they would in nice clean air. The knock-on effect of the dirty air on the racing is that when one car is following another, the car that is following has less downforce. This makes braking and cornering much more difficult. Your tyres slide more, affecting your lap time and degrading the tyres quicker. It's common in an F1 race to see a following car try to make an overtake for 2, 3 or 4 laps before backing off the car they're chasing to roughly 2 seconds behind them. They do this because that reduced downforce level causes their tyres to overheat and degrade quicker. The weight of the current cars makes this even worse as well, because when the tyres slip on the track surface, more force is applied to them than in the previous iterations of the F1 regulations. They have to back off to let their tyres cool down before they have another go at the car in front. As fans, we want to see cars battling on track constantly, not watching a timing sheet with 20 cars all 2 seconds apart from each other. Nicholas Tombazis confirmed during the press conference that the FIA will be addressing the amount of dirty air that the cars leave behind them in 2026. In aerodynamic terms, the FIA views the 2026 cars as an evolution of the concept that we have right now. There'll still be ground effect, and the hope is that the rules will be improved to ensure cars can follow each other. This comes amid the recent admission that some loopholes were left in the current regulations that allow teams to introduce designs that hurt the airflow to pursuing cars, such as outwash from the front wings. The plan is for less downforce and drag, and current simulations do not point to lap times being dramatically worse than they are now, although ultimately Tombazis says that outright speed is not its biggest worry. It is really not a huge factor, he said. It's going to be very close to now. I think we're going to be within a couple of seconds or something like that. But even if it was 5 seconds slower, we're not going to be sweating too much. In terms of their looks, Tombazis says that the 2026 cars will be similar to now. Somebody who knows about it will be able to see the differences, but they will look like F1 cars. On that, there wouldn't be any doubt. Don't worry, when the new cars are revealed, I'll make sure to point out everything you might have missed. One of the big changes to how the 2026 cars will work is going to be more movable aero to help reduce downforce on the straights. Movable aero refers to things like the drag reduction system, or DRS, that we have on the current cars. The flexi wings that became a problem in early 2023 would also be classed as movable aero, though they were introduced by many teams against the wishes of the FIA and were eventually clamped down on. Movable aero is basically just any aero impacting surface of the car that moves. In terms of DRS for 2026, things have not been finalized, with the FIA weighing up several different ideas to deliver overtaking opportunities. There will be something equivalent to the current DRS, which will basically enable the following car that is within a certain limit to potentially get in a position to attack, he said. What form that mechanism will take, whether it'll be an additional change of an aerodynamic component on the straight, or an additional change of the aerodynamic component in the corner, or whether it'll be part of the energy of the engine. What we don't want to have is cars basically diving past each other on the straight. We want cars arriving close to each other at the braking point, and there being a fight and drivers having to use their skill. This is a pretty common complaint from fans of the current regulations. With drivers doing the vast majority of overtaking on the straights, driver skill has less of an impact on the outcome of a race than it has done in the past. It is great to hear that the FIA are addressing this. With driver skill being a bigger part of the equation again, the sport will be less about who has the best car, and more about who actually drove the best race. I'm sure you'll agree that's what we all want. Talk of the 2026 regulation plans earlier this year was dominated by concerns from Red Bull in particular, of there being potential for big problems on the horizon. With the output of the internal combustion engine element of the power unit going from around 550 to 560 kilowatts down to 400 kilowatts, and the battery element jumping from 150 kilowatts to 350 kilowatts. There were rumors that the battery would run out on the straights. Even with lighter cars, if drag was too high, places like Monza with really long straights could be a challenge and force drivers to do weird stuff, like changing down gears on the straight to try to get some recharging done. Tombazis thinks those worries were unfounded and based on early simulation models that were far away from where things are at right now. These were comments that were probably a bit premature because we hadn't completed the work yet, he said. We never believed that was a disaster scenario because we knew that there were solutions. So the cars won't be reaching the top speed in the middle of the straight and then degrading or anything like that. That's not going to be the case. Drivers having to lift and coast on straights due to a lack of electrical energy was never actually going to be a problem, but it's still good to hear that the FIA have addressed it even being a possibility. I don't know about you, but I'm excited about everything I heard from Tombazis. Formula 1 cars returning to their roots and becoming racier is fantastic news. The needle tipping more towards driver skill rather than car performance is also amazing. That is the direction the sport should be going in. I want to know what your thoughts are though. Do these announcements get you excited for 2026? Or are you going to wait until you see the new cars on track to be convinced? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and until next time, drive safe and bye for now.